Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Surviving Change. Today, we want to speak with someone who's had to address some changes in her body. Changes that she definitely did not invite, changes that she did not know would occur, but changes that took place nonetheless. We're talking about cancer. And for those of you who know anyone who's dealt with cancer or who has been affected by cancer, you know that this is a change that no one sees coming, but definitely has to deal with in their own way. And so we have with us today Mitchelle Terrell, who is a breast cancer survivor. Please welcome Mitchelle to Surviving Change.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started with just a little bit of background information about you, and just to let the audience know who you are. Yes, you are a breast cancer survivor, but who is Mitchelle Terrell?
Mitchelle Terrell, I am a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm an aunt, and just all around happy person.
All around happy person. And so that happiness does radiate from you. It's been a pleasure knowing you as a colleague. But in addition to the happiness that radiates around you just from the different roles that you fulfill, there have been some moments, and we all can attest as women, where that happiness has been challenged.
Right.
Prior to your happiness being challenged, how had you been raised, the type of woman that you had been raised to be? What was that upbringing like?
I was raised to become an independent young woman. I've always been kind of strong-willed, stubborn, if you would. If you ask my dad, he'd still tell you I'm stubborn.
Okay.
But kind of independent, always getting things done. If nobody else could do it, I'm the one that you could ask. I would make sure it got done, and done with integrity.
Okay.
So.
All right. And with that independence, how did that prepare you in becoming a wife and a mother? Did it get in the way sometimes, or?
Sometimes it could, because I didn't always like to listen to what everybody else was doing, because the bottom line was the decision was going to be mine anyway, so I was just going to do what I was going to do regardless as to what anyone said. Of course, getting married, you can't always just make those decisions on your own, because there's always somebody else to consider how the consequences will affect them. And of course, introducing children to that mix is another dynamic altogether.
Yes,
So.
I've learned as a mother that as independent as I would like to be, there's someone else pulling my strings. And it's usually my son, and then, it's my husband, and sometimes before them it's the dog. So it just depends on that is. But I know for us growing up in the 70s and the 80s, and then there was Oprah, and Oprah was every woman, and she, to the dismay of some men, was an example of independence, was an example of strength, was an example of you can have it all, you can do it all, in the absence of, men, or with a man standing by your side. You don't have to ask for permission, just do it. And so as you went into your career, what were some of the things that you did independently you feel that was just a foundation for what you were going to face next in your life?
I'm an educator, so I think innately I like to learn about things. I'm always trying to learn something, so forever being educated. And going into my diagnosis, the first thing that I did, once the initial shock wore off, was to go and find out everything I could possibly learn about breast cancer. And, Google is great in learning what you need to know or what you want to know, but I found that even in being educated, there were some things that knowing all the facts still didn't prepare me for mentally. So I still felt like I didn't know enough. So then, you turn to people that experience something, but their experiences are not what your experience is. It's different for everybody. So even knowing some things going in didn't prepare me mentally for what it actually was going to feel like for me.
Got it. And so you have this moment of vulnerability, which is a total contradiction to the independent woman you had been trained and had been told that you needed to become, the life that you lived, even though you independently sought out the information. There were just some things that were going to be baffling because the experience was so fresh and new. So if you would just take us to that moment when the doctor shared with you their prognosis.
Well, one thing that a lot of people don't know is that my sister is also a breast cancer survivor. So I watched her pretty much go through the same, what I thought would be the same thing that I was going through. So in my mind, I know that you can survive. I know that medicine has advanced, leaps and bounds from when she was diagnosed. But one of the things that was really challenging for me was my faith. I always felt like, I was a faithful person. I married my husband because he's just such a faithful man, and that was one of the things that drew me to him. But my faith was challenged when I received the diagnosis. My husband was of the mindset, I'll never forget, we were sitting in not even in the doctor's waiting room, we were in the actual exam room. And when she walked in my mind, in the back of my mind, I knew what the diagnosis would be. I knew that it was breast cancer before she said that it was breast cancer, but it was stunning for him. And my sister was with me, and so it was the three of us, and she was completely poised, put together. She just, because she'd been down this road before. And my husband's reaction was shock. I think initially it was shock. And for me, it was just almost like an out-of-body experience. I was standing there, I was hearing everything she was saying, but I wasn't.
Okay.
I wasn't. So it was almost as if I felt myself step outside of who I had known myself to be for those 39 years of my life.
Okay. And so you said that your faith was challenged. In what way was your faith challenged?
I felt my sister had already been through that. God, why are you doing this to me? I know how to do, I saw her walk through this. She faced the fire, she faced all of this. So why is it really necessary for me to have to go through that? So it was kind of a why me? Why me? And I was probably in that why me phase probably for about 5 days.
Okay.
And the one thing that people don't really prepare you for, and it may be different now, but there's a test, and then there's at least a 5-day wait. Then there's another test, and there's 5 more days that you're waiting. That waiting in between time, that's how I see people can easily fall into a depression if you're not constantly trying to uplift yourself, because you're constantly waiting, and the news is, it's cancer. It's nothing that's going to be glamorous about it. It's nothing great about it. There's treatment. These are the treatment options, but none of it is really what you want. So I felt like I'm a good person. I do what I'm supposed to do. I make sure my husband is taken care of. I take care of my kids. I make sure that I'm involved in my parents' lives. I'm still a family person. Why then? Why would you have this? Why is this my test?
Okay. As you asked the question, why, did you see your husband having some challenges with his faith, or your children? Well, let's start with your husband. Did he have some challenges with his faith and how he responded to you?
I think at the very beginning, he was still a little in disbelief as well. I remember, he, like I said, he's a very faithful person. He asks God a question and he expects God to answer it. And that's just the type of person that he is. I think he was maybe a little mad. He never said it, but I think he was maybe a little mad or disappointed that was the road that we had to take, because everybody has their circumstances that they're going through anyway, and what we were dealing with at that current moment felt like enough. But then when you added that to it, he just was, I think, a little not very pleased that was the route that God would have us to take. But I think maybe before I started with the initial treatment, by the time we rolled around to that, he was fine. He was fine.
All right.
My kids were, it was 2009, so I think they were 8 and 9 at the time. So, they're pretty young, and they didn't really understand a whole lot of what was going on. And so I don't think it was very challenging for them. They look back at it now and remember some things that they understand, because now they've seen what cancer looks like and how other people are going through their process. So they're like, okay, yeah, I remember that.
Okay. All right. So what steps did you all have to take as you're hoping that you have an answer, did you ever get the answer? And what steps did you have to take, with or without the answer, just to get through the process, the disbelief and the hurt and all of that goes with dealing with cancer?
I had a great team of doctors, and I think that made a whole lot of difference. I had almost the same team of doctors that my sister had. Okay. So it was, the family history was there, so they kind of knew who we were just because of my sister. My dad had also battled cancer as well, so we had some of the same doctors. So it made getting answers a little bit easier, I think, for us. But even with that, because in my mind, I thought it was going to be exactly like my sister's process was, but it wasn't. So I wanted to know, well, why can't I do it that way? Mm-hmm. Well, when she did this, you did this. Mm-hmm. And so finally, I think by the time it was all said and done, almost a month had gone by before we started any treatment. And my doctor finally said, look, you poo-pooed on everything that I've said. You are not your sister. Mm-hmm. So this is what I think we should do. We've wasted enough time. You know, it had actually gotten a little larger. And I think when she said that, that was the defining moment. Okay, so what do you think I should do? And that's what I did. So going forward, it took almost all of that time, I think, for my mind to say, okay, it's a different experience for everybody. And we just moved forward from there. So eventually I got the answer and we moved.
Okay, so no longer independent.
No longer
now
independent.
You're having to depend on the word of the doctors, the medical team, so many people around you to carry you through this process. How did that feel, having to depend on others, knowing that you were the one that made sure if anything had to be done that people could depend on you? Right.
It shows you who people really are. When people say something, if they really mean it. I learned right away when people say, let me know if you need anything, they really didn't really want to follow through on that. Some did, but the ones that I thought would be there all the time were the ones that kind of fell away, and you kind of see who you're left with. In terms of being the one that got everything done, I still had a couple of friends that just kind of picked up my schedule with whatever it was for the kids and made sure that it still ran flawlessly. I mean, flawlessly. My parents were always available. My sister and her husband were always available. So it was just a matter of releasing the control. And I think after that first chemo treatment, I realized then that I had to release it because it was stressful. And stress was the one thing that they made sure you knew that you did not need, because it didn't help with the process at all. But even with that, one particular thing, losing my hair was one of the things that I think I was most afraid of. And that was one of the things that I found out going through it. No one could have said anything that would have prepared me any better for that particular incident. I cut my hair off. It was kind of short like yours, whereas before I had, the long bob layered look, I always had my hair. And, growing up in our day and age, that was your crown and glory. You had good hair. Yeah. So I cut my hair off pretty short thinking, okay, this is going to be good. But nothing prepared me for when I was lying on the couch and I reach up to scratch my hair. And then I bring my hand down, and it's all just patches of hair in my hand. And who do you call? Yeah. Because everybody's experience is different. People were like, oh, it's going to happen after the first chemo treatment. Well, mine wasn't. It didn't happen until 3 months later. And no, it wasn't any of that. It just kind of happened. So you kind of just deal with it. And then again, that was where I think my faith, even though it had been shaken, I didn't have anybody else to talk to. So, you pray. I prayed a lot. I wrote a lot. I journaled a lot. Excuse me. I spent a lot of time just kind of reflecting, just to make sure that I wasn't being lost in the process, that he was still right beside me, walking hand in hand with me.
Okay. It's amazing. A lot of people I've talked to talk about the moments alone. You know, you've said that you had the support of your family, your parents, your sister, her husband, your husband. I'm sure your children were as supportive as they could be even at their young age, but still you find yourself alone. And immediately in your independence, you realize that was just it wasn't so much that it was a phase, but it was really preparing you to be independent in your faith.
Right.
And to be able to call out to God in your alone time, to say to God, hey, this is where I am. I need you. There's no one else that can provide for me like you do. Share with our audience some of the things that you feel were ministered back to you as you spent that time alone, as you were going through the healing process. What are some of the things you feel God was ministering to you about you as a woman?
One of the most memorable things, I think, throughout this entire process was my church family. We belonged to a pretty large church, and my husband at the time was a minister of music, and while he's very known, very popular, a lot of people didn't know that I was his wife. So because we were not famous, I guess he was well known in the church, I was not. So when we mentioned it to our pastor, of course, I knew them very well, and when they mentioned it to the church, it was such an outpouring of love and support from them and so many people that I did not know and still don't know to this day. And we're still members of the same church, and they still ask about me and check on me and make sure I'm fine. And I'm almost 10 years out now, but they still remember that moment. And it was beautiful. I remember I was called up and they prayed for me, and those people, I mean, the cards, I guess I was alone, but he would send a card my way, or, somebody would send alkaline water, somebody wanted to know what my favorite juice was. Those little things were always coming for me, and I think that helped strengthen my faith as I continued to go through that entire process. As I continued, well, not continue, but when I first asked the question, why me, I felt the why not you. Who are you? You're not such a great, nice person that things won't happen to you. And this is something that I've allowed to happen to you. So why not you? Let me shine through this, through you. I remember I worked through my entire treatment as long as I could. Of course, there's your downtime. But even in between the several surgeries I had, I still managed to go to work. And every now and then I would go to church, and people would always say, if we did not know that you had cancer, looking at you, no one would be able to tell. So I was very thankful that I didn't look like what I was going through, and that to me again was strengthening my faith. People got to see grace, even in the most dark time. My faith was there, and I had God's grace, and that was how I continued to grow, I think, in my faith. Just talking to him, and my best times even now are in the shower. I think I get my best revelations. He answers me when I'm in the shower, because that's it's alone time for me. Nobody's gonna knock on the door. Well, my kids are now at the age where they're not knocking on the door trying to get in and see what I'm doing. So it's just crazy, but everybody has their closet. My closet happens to be my bathroom, and my shower is specifically where I go to just think.
That's beautiful. You mentioned that you would work through the entire process, and amazingly, when we started working together again, and you were telling me, you remember I had cancer, and I remember your hair being short. I remember it being long. I remember it being short. And I remember it being mentioned. But because you worked through the process and you talk about the grace that was on you, A lot of people don't go through changes gracefully. Like they let everyone see just how ugly it is because they become ugly in their demeanor, they become ugly in their perception, and really they push people away. And you say in your downtime, in your time alone, that God was ministering grace to you, which is phenomenal. So for those who are going through the process, what can you say to them about grace that was extended to you? And ultimately, I would say thank you for how gracious you were in going through the process, because as someone who hasn't had to face that, the whole idea is frightening. But because of how you went through, not that I'm like, okay, God, give me cancer, but
Right,
right. You know that there is rainbow, not at the end, but there's rainbow during. So talk to us about how being gracious through the process was good for you and for others.
I think a lot of it was in my upbringing. I'm not a look at me kind of person. I'm fine blending into the background. So I think I always carried myself that way. I wanted to be that kind of woman. Even in the independent woman phase, I still felt very grateful. So the grace that I think I felt was because I opened myself up for it. I didn't want to be bitter. I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. I didn't want to be scary. I didn't want to become somebody that I wasn't. And I didn't want to just play the cancer card every time I had the opportunity, because people treat you differently, and sometimes it could be a good thing, but I didn't always want that to be the reason that people did things for me or wanted to help me. So I didn't, if you didn't know me, I wasn't telling you, yeah, I have cancer. I remember seeing, because at that particular time, right when I was diagnosed, I had also gotten a promotion at the school where I was. So, people kind of saw the changes, but they didn't, it was at a new school, so they didn't know me well enough to ask me anything, but they just saw it. And I remember when my principal said, he finally announced it to the admin and the leadership team that I would be leaving for surgery. And he asked if he could share that information, and it was silent. Nobody could believe that I had been going through all of the things that I had been going through. I was leaving work, going to chemo treatments and coming back, and nobody ever really knew, because I just continued. I was the same type of person that I wanted to be. And I believe that you treat people the way that you want to be treated, and that was that part of the grace that I felt like he continued to let be a part of my life. So it's kind of who you are. I think if you're not practicing that in your daily life, start doing some internal reflection and try to become, make some small changes. Of course, it's not going to happen all at once, but it's something that I think you have to want in your life.
Yeah, that's amazing for you to share, because a lot of people think that automatically when I go through something, then I'm going to get the grace or the strength or the power that I need to endure. But just like when we raise children, we're equipping them for the future and what's to come. Right. And a lot of times as believers, we don't recognize that the things that we're going through is preparing us for the time to come. And it is just a refreshing and a revelation to hear you say that, because so often we do get caught up in getting comfortable, that when the rubber hits the road, we're asking, why me?
Right.
And then God will say, well, why not you? I've prepared you. You're ready. Let's go through this. I'm with you. I'll never leave you. I will work this out for your good. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and all of those things that come to our mind once we stop asking the question of why. So now that you have been a survivor for more than 8 years, what is the big lesson that you've taken away from this process that continues to radiate through your life today?
It probably sounds cliche, but don't sweat the small stuff. I feel like I know he didn't bring me through all of that for me to be unhappy in my life. So no matter what the circumstances are, I just know that God has been good to me and something greater is coming from it. I may not see it immediately. I don't know what it's going to be, but I know that he can bring me through it. And I think that radiates through all of my life. You know, even with my kids, I've got a daughter getting ready to go to school. I can't even imagine what that emptiness is going to feel like, and not being there to share in her moments, all of the new things that I know she's going to discover. But I know that he's got her because we've also taught her about faith and how God works in our lives even when we're not looking at it. So just not worrying about the small things. And sometimes it's easier said than done. It's not like, you know, my life is all tulips and roses now. It's not. You know, my job can be stressful at times, just like anybody else's job. Family issues come around, and you know, I have a regular life, a regular person's life, and I just know that the God that we serve, the God that, you know, my family raised me to believe in, he's there even in the hard parts of it. So that's something that I think stays with me all of the time.
Someone who might just be going through a traumatic event, whether it's an illness or a relationship issue, would listen to you and say, don't sweat the small stuff. Cancer was not a small thing, but I guess having gone through that, anything that happens to you now, it's like, hey, this is nothing in comparison. If God took me through that, then I've got the rest. And that is what is so magnificent to hear. You know, especially someone, I've dealt with my own different traumas and things of that nature, but keeping it in perspective, you know, this is nothing compared to what God is taking you through. So if he's taking you through that, then he can get you through anything else.
I think, I'm sorry, when I look at, because everybody with cancer does not survive, and because I know that, it does make anything else that come after it almost nothing. Because when I told my story for the Breast Cancer Foundation, one of the things that they found was interesting. You know, everybody has the little captions for their birthdays. And all of my friends were about to turn 40. And everybody was fit and fabulous at 40. I was fighting for my life at 40. And it was nothing but that. You know, the treatments, as a matter of fact, my last chemo treatment was about 3 weeks before my 40th birthday. So everybody else was being fabulous. I remember thinking this is the worst birthday ever. But now when I look back, I survived. You know, it's just been an amazing journey. I know I'm not at the end of it. I'm always telling people I feel like I'm still looking for my new normal, because I haven't quite got back to the strong-willed, stubborn, independent Mitchelle. Some of it, yes, but a lot of it, no. And I think I'm okay with that, because I've learned that letting people help me is not as difficult, or letting somebody else say how things should be is actually okay sometimes, because I don't have to sweat the small stuff. I don't have to make sure all the small, minute details. It's not my responsibility. So I'm okay with that.
That's awesome. We could really talk about not sweating the small stuff, walking in grace for another half hour. Unfortunately, we don't have that time, but I do want to give you the opportunity to share with our audience some of the projects that you're working on and some other things that they could get involved in if they, you know, want to support someone or get the support they need.
While I was going through this, one of my very good friends, Wendy Jackson, she said I could share her name. Wendy Jackson was so moved with the process and everything that I was going through. And she said every time she saw me, I looked like I was glowing. And I'm thinking, when did you see me? She literally was, shockingly, the first person I remember seeing after one of the surgeries in the recovery room. I opened my eyes and she was sitting right in front of me. And she said, it looked like you just had this halo around you and there was this light shining on you. And I said, what I remember is that silver bonnet on my head, and I had just come out of the operating room. But she was so moved that she decided, I gotta do something. I wanna do something. and the type of person that she is she's just one of those fabulous, always well put together. Even on her bad day, she's well put together. So she started the organization Posh for a Purpose. Okay. And one of the things that she does is a fashion show for survivors and their caregivers. And it's a fashion show where we get to model, and still feel like we're beautiful and we belong, and the caregivers are there with us as well. We tell our story as we walk the runway, and donations are made from different designers, so we get to keep the clothes, the shoes, everything that we wear that night.
Okay, and so when's the next Posh for a Purpose?
The next event that we're having is actually just it's a women's health fair. It's July 21st, Saturday, July 21st. It's a free event. It's being held downtown Atlanta at the Georgia Power Building. So go to poshforapurpose.org. You can register there and come out and join us.
Okay. Audience, you hear Mitchelle Terrell. You've heard her story, and I'm sure some of you have heard many stories. But what I want you to take from this is that in her darkest moments, she remembered God's grace. She remembered that God had prepared her. When she thought she had to be independent, he showed her how to allow him to be strong in her weakness. And so through his grace and her faithfulness and those around her, she was able to come out and have purpose. And not only purpose, but to inspire others through the organization Posh for a Purpose. So please reach out and connect to those who are there to help you if you're dealing with cancer in any form, or to help those who are dealing with cancer. And remember that regardless of what the change is, you can survive change. Until next time, I'm Angela Addison. Come back and join us on Surviving Change.